Welcome to another quiet journey into the distant past. Tonight, we drift back in time to the long, cold nights of the Middle Ages, a time when the world was darker, colder, and harder, especially for the common folk, the peasants. But how did they survive the bitter winters without electricity, modern heating, or insulation? Let us begin by stepping into a humble village in the 13th century Europe. The sun has set, the wind is howling, and the temperature is dropping fast. The typical peasant home was a simple structure made from wattle and daub, woven sticks covered with mud and straw. Roofs were thatched, walls were thin, and there was almost no insulation. Inside, there was usually just one room, shared by the entire family. Sometimes, even the animals slept inside. Cows, pigs, chickens, not out of kindness, but necessity. Their body heat helped warm the room. The floor was bare earth. There were no glass windows, just shutters or holes. At the center of the house, a small fire pit, with smoke rising through a hole in the roof. It was smoky, damp, and cold, but it was their shelter, their only defense against the winter winds. Children often helped pack mud into cracks to stop the breeze. Straw was stuffed into holes in the wall as makeshift insulation. When it rained, the roof often leaked. Moss and thatch had to be replaced every few seasons. The smell inside was strong, a mix of animals, smoke, and earth. But to them, it was home. The walls creaked with the wind outside, a constant reminder of nature's power. Chickens often clucked through the night, disrupting fragile sleep. Families adapted to live in rhythm with the seasons. Summer repairs were essential preparation for surviving the cold. Each crack sealed was a small victory against the frost. The home was no castle, but it stood as a fortress of endurance. The fire was life. Without it, death came quickly. Peasants spent hours collecting firewood during the day. Wood was often scarce. Trees were owned by lords. In some places, stealing firewood could mean a harsh punishment. So families burned peat, dried animal dung, or even straw. They gathered around the fire each night, cooking, eating, warming their hands. Ashes were kept hot overnight by burying embers under ash or stone. If the fire went out, they'd have to beg a neighbor to relight it, or strike flint and steel to start it again. A slow and painful process in the cold. Smoke filled the home and irritated the eyes. Children often coughed through the night. Sometimes fires sparked and burned part of the roof. There were no chimneys, just a hole above. Still, the hearth was the heart of the home. Around it, stories were told. Songs were sung, and it was where life clung on. The fire crackled like a heartbeat, pulsing life into the night. Even the glow of embers offered psychological warmth. Cooking pots hung above it, meals slowly bubbling through the evening. Children watched the flames, hypnotized by the flicker. The fire brought not just warmth, it brought a sense of security. Its survival became a sacred duty passed down every night. In winter, food wasn't just about survival, it was about warmth. Meals were simple, heavy, and full of carbs. Thick porridge, boiled grains, root vegetables like turnips and onions. Stews simmered slowly over the fire, sometimes with beans, lentils, or a bit of salted meat. Meat was rare for peasants, usually only during holidays. Preserved foods were key. Smoked fish, salted pork, dried bread. They drank warm ale, weak beer, or herbal teas, not for taste, but for heat. Water often froze or became unsafe, and a warm belly meant a warmer night. Sometimes, stale bread was soaked in broth to make it edible. Garlic and onions were prized not just for taste, but warmth. A full stomach helped people sleep better. Leftovers were stored in cool corners or buried outside. Spoilage was common, but waste was a luxury. Everything was used. Even bones were boiled for hours to make broth. Herbs grown in summer were dried and stored for soups. Salt was a precious commodity, often traded and cherished. Children learned early how to gather and store food for winter. Hunger was never far, so every bite mattered. Food rituals became sacred moments in daily life. Cooking together helped bind families through dark times. Peasants wore every piece of clothing they owned. Wool was the fabric of survival. It held heat even when wet. Undergarments made of linen, tunics, cloaks, and thick hoods layered on top. Children were wrapped in anything available: old blankets, sacks, or furs if lucky. Gloves and socks were rare, so hands and feet were rubbed with animal fat or covered in straw. At night, families huddled together, layering bodies under shared covers. Some used straw-stuffed mattresses or slept on warm hay near the fire. The closer to the hearth, the warmer the sleep. But be too close, and risk burning your clothes or yourself. Clothes were not changed often, and dirt added extra insulation. They patched holes again and again. Dyes were rare. Most garments were brown, gray, or off-white. Shoes were made of rough leather, often worn through. Scarves and head coverings helped prevent heat loss. Every layer mattered. Every thread was precious. Mothers spent long nights repairing torn garments by candlelight. Woolen cloaks were often passed down through generations. In some villages, community weaving circles existed. The smell of wet wool was familiar in winter air. Even the poor aimed to keep their family decent, despite hardship. Warmth was stitched from survival, not style. Beds were a luxury for the rich. For peasants, sleep meant a straw pile on the ground, sometimes on a wooden frame, but often just on the cold floor. Multiple generations slept side by side. Parents, children, even grandparents. The warmth of others was essential. Blankets were made from wool or old clothing sewn together. And in the harshest months, animals, dogs, goats, cats, joined the pile. Each body, each breath, added a little more heat. There was no privacy, but there was survival. Many children clung to their parents for comfort. Lullabies were sung softly to ease the night. Mice often scurried nearby, and fleas were common. People scratched through their sleep. Dreams were broken and shallow, but to wake up alive was a blessing. The sound of others breathing brought comfort. Warmth was a shared effort, not an individual one. Cold drafts would still sneak through the walls. Parents positioned themselves near doors to shield the young. Sleep was often interrupted by coughing or shivering. Still, morning light meant another victory against the cold. Cold brought more than discomfort. It brought illness. Coughs became deadly. Fevers turned into death sentences. There were no antibiotics, no hospitals. Herbal remedies were passed down through generations: garlic, mint, yarrow. Some turned to superstition: amulets, prayers, charms. Priests offered blessings. But the winter took who it wished. Children were especially vulnerable. Many didn't survive their first winter. Graves were dug in frozen ground, often shallow, often hurried. Life expectancy was short, sometimes 30 or 35 years. But still, they endured. Somehow, neighbors sometimes helped bury the dead. Mourning was brief. Survival couldn't wait. Black cloth or a cross on the door marked death. Fever dreams were considered signs from God. Mothers wept quietly at night. Life and death were both daily companions. Coughing through the night became a familiar sound. Midwives and herbalists were frontline caregivers. Soup and steam were used to ease congestion. Many believed illness was a punishment for sin. Bodies were often buried with small tokens or herbs. Villages bore the weight of every child lost. In the depths of winter, community meant everything. Neighbors shared food, warmth, and stories. If your fire died, a neighbor might offer an ember. If you were sick, someone might bring broth. Churches offered sanctuary, a warm place to rest or pray. Feasts, even during famine, brought hope. Simple songs, Laughter and old tales kept the spirit alive. Survival was never individual, it was collective. A village endured, or it did not. Children played games to distract from hunger. Elders shared wisdom by the fire. Tools were lent, and debts forgiven. One family's loss was mourned by all. Festivals like Yule were moments of unity. Even the poorest gave what they could. People gathered close in barns or churches for warmth. Gossip, jokes, and old stories helped pass the long nights. Musicians played flutes or fiddles from memory. Handmade gifts were exchanged in acts of kindness. Hope lived not in things, but in togetherness. Fellowship was their greatest defense against despair. Winter wasn't just physical, it was mental. Weeks of darkness, hunger, illness, grief. Many felt hopeless. Many gave up, but others held on, through ritual, faith, or stubborn strength. The church bells still rang, the seasons still changed, and with every bitter night came the hope of spring. Hope that someday warmth would return. Mothers whispered prayers for the sun. Children stared into the fire, dreaming of warmth. Fathers carved tokens for luck and courage. Stories of old heroes reminded them to endure. Even in suffering, they found meaning. Hope was a fire that burned within. Many kept calendars, counting the days to spring. Faith gave structure to endless weeks of dark. A single bloom of snowdrop was a symbol of rebirth. Some kept journals, others etched marks into wood beams. They waited for the thaw, the first chirp of birds. To hold on mentally was a kind of nobility in itself. As we leave the medieval world behind, we remember a truth, that comfort was once a luxury, that every warm bed, every soft blanket, every quiet heater is a miracle our ancestors never knew. So tonight, as you close your eyes, let the fire of history warm your mind, and may your sleep be deeper than the coldest night in the Middle Ages. Good night, and remember, they endured so that we could dream. Let their strength wrap you like a blanket. You are warmer than kings once were, and far from forgotten are those who faced the frost with courage.